Good morning. This is Pastor or retired Pastor Karl Schmidt from Calvary Lutheran Church, the Lutheran Church in Amherst, New York. We welcome you to the sixth Sunday after the Feast of Holy Trinity, this end of July 31st, 2022, actually. We're about 2.5 years into pandemic, COVID, and yeah, for the most part, things are getting somewhat better, a little bit back to normal, which is nice. Most people in the country have gotten their vaccines and their boosters, and if you haven't, for heaven's sakes, just go do it. I mean, there's absolutely no logical reason not to, none whatsoever. So just go talk to your doctor and get your shot. Very simple. Okay, now on with the business at hand. The text appointed for the sixth Sunday after Trinity is from the Gospel of Mark, the 8th chapter, the first 9 verses. In those days, the multitude being very great, and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples unto him, and said unto them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now been with me 3 days, and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their own homes, they will faint by the way, for many of them came from far. And his disciples answered him, From whence can a man buy bread for these people here in the wilderness? And he asked them, How many loaves of bread do you have? And they said, 7. And he commanded the people to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves and gave thanks, and broke the bread and gave it to his disciples, and they set before the people, and they also had a few small fish, and he blessed them and commanded them also to be set before the people. And so the people ate and were filled, and they took up the broken loaves of bread and the meat from the fish that was left over, and that had eaten were about 4,000 people, and he sent them away. Here ends that portion of the gospel text, this miraculous feeding from the Gospel of Mark, the 8th chapter, verses 1 through 9. Now, a lot of people would maybe focus on this miracle, and I'm sure that was wonderful for these thousands of people who had basically run out of food to be fed in the wilderness place before they had to head on home, and I'm sure that they filled up their baskets so that whatever picnic baskets or supplies they had brought along into the wilderness were filled up enough so that they could make the journey home. But that's not what I really want to focus on this morning from this text. I think there's something a bit more important that we should look at. It's verse 2, where Jesus said, I have compassion on the multitude because they have now been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. That verse 2 of Mark chapter 8. And Jesus says something very interesting here. Been with me. This is actually a verb in the Greek, prosmenosin. It's a combination of 2 words, pros and meno. Meno means with, and pros means to or toward, generally. So you put the 2 together and put it in a verb form, and what you have is that the meaning essentially is to remain or to continue with someone. So Jesus had walked these people from a habited area where they had lived or were living to a wilderness area that was far from a grocery store. Now, you see, the thing about wilderness areas, we're all familiar with that. If you're driving and you're going from point A to point B, and those are both habited areas. There's a lot of areas in the United States that are just open highway, and there's not even gas stations. There's just about nothing in some of those places. Even here in New York, you can get on the expressway between Buffalo and New York City, and there's a lot of stretches where there's nothing for maybe 20, 30 miles. Nothing but farmland or forests. And New York is a relatively populated state compared to, I don't know, some places maybe like South Dakota, Minnesota. Been out there, and there you can go for 100 miles and not run into anyone or anything. That's the thing about going out in areas where there's nothing, no people living, and you don't find grocery stores, you don't find food, you don't find commodities, you don't find anything to purchase or sell. You just don't find anything because that's not where people live. And Jesus purposefully walked as these people, this massive crowd. You have 4,000 people plus, depending on how you want to count these people and account for them. But in any case, you have thousands of people. Now, if you can imagine a concert venue with 4,000 people and a band playing, and then trying to walk that whole mess a distance out into a wilderness, several days walk, while the people are listening to someone speak, that would be unruly. It would be chaos. It would be mayhem at very best. You have children running around, and people need to use the bathrooms, and there really are none, and so they'd have to find convenient places for human needs. And they'd also have to stop, and people would have to prepare food, so you'd have to set up campfires. And then if after several days, overnight, people would have to rest and sleep, so you'd have to set up tents. And of course, these people had been generally nomadic. They had finally settled down into cities. But for the most part, they were pretty good with tents. So that wasn't any big accomplishment for them, throwing up together a tent, or they oftentimes tabernacled as part of their religious ceremonies. And so that wasn't unique or difficult for them. It was something they were used to doing. Tabernacle was simply just a flimsy or loose structure with four walls and not really a roof. But tenting, of course, you have a roof with a couple layers. So this is something they had basically gone camping with 4,000 people and all their supplies, and after several days, the food had run out. And if you're the one leading these people away from where the grocery stores are, where the food vendors are, of course they had vendors and they had their own grocery stores and all the rest. These were habited areas, populated areas, and merchants bought and sold. And this was, just like it is today, roughly. Just a bit more primitive, but overall the same. And so he leads them out into a wilderness place. Now, verse 2 says he has compassion on the multitude because now they've all run out of food. And in fact, if they looked around, they found basically a lunchbox with food, a couple loaves and some fish. And these aren't big like tuna. These are more like the Jewish practice was to have small fish, what we might call sardines. Sardine is basically any small fish you can cram into a can. And so this was more their style. They would have small fish caught in the Sea of Galilee or whatever, and they would have basically a light stew in a bowl and flatbread, and then with that maybe some fish roasted over fire on sticks. And so sometimes they bring iron grates, and it's your basic camping gear. But now they were run out of food. Now, whose fault is this? You have to think in responsible terms when you have a crowd of 4,000 people, families, men, women, children, family. This is a big logistical thing, and if you purposefully walk them into a wilderness area away from where there's available food and conveniences, human conveniences, bathrooms and places to wash and places where they can set up tents, well, that's kind of on you, isn't it? If you're purposely walking and talking and leading away from where there's any help, resource, that's your fault. So when Jesus says, I have compassion on the multitude, this kind of shows a sense of humor because he's directly responsible for them not being around where the grocery stores are, where their homes were close enough so that they could go home and go to sleep or make their meals or use rest facilities. That was his fault. And yet he says he has compassion on them. And so we see this miraculous feeding, and people go, oh wow, he did this marvelous thing, when in fact really this story is about Jesus causing inconvenience, a difficulty that wouldn't have necessarily existed except that he was there. And I bring this up because this affects us daily in life. Because there's a lot of parts of our lives that are inconvenient. A lot of things in our lives where the Lord leads us into paths that are inconvenient, that are difficult. The 23rd Psalm is about this very thing, in fact. A psalm that is considered to be a great comfort psalm, a psalm that's used at funerals. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me beside still waters. He prepares a place for me, and yada, yada, yada. Okay, so on and so forth. Well, sure, he does all that, but that's only because he's led us away from the established fold, the established place of safety, into the wilderness, where shepherds would normally take the sheep to go feed in pastures that were more green. Well, excuse me. Morning voice. Definitely need a drink of water today. Anyways, so this text, although it is about him having compassion on the people and doing something about it, a miraculous feeding, yes, as fine as that is, and that they had food to go home, he is the initial cause of the whole problem. And when you look at your life, my life, sometimes we have to wonder, because it isn't a very smooth road, is it? Things are not yippee-skippy. It's not all like some TV show where at the end of a 23-minute episode, everything resolves itself and they all pat each other on the back, smile, and go home happy. No, in real life, people get sick, people lose their jobs, the people lose their homes, there are floods, there are wars. A place like Russia invades Ukraine because they want the grain fields. It's nothing more than the greed of some elderly old man who is sick-minded, Putin, and no surprise there. That goes on all the time. It goes on in American business. It goes on all around the world. This is normal. The world's a very wicked place. Anybody who's lived in it knows that. And being religious or believing in God doesn't make it easier. If anything, it makes it more difficult. Because then you not only have the normal things that you're up against, the floods, the trouble in this world, the difficulty in the economy, and all the rest, political nut jobs that are out there, that as if life wasn't difficult enough, now there's idiots running around with their little signs and their politics as though we need that. Regular people just want to do their job, get paid, go home and eat, be with their family. No one really has time for this nonsense. No one. It's just ridiculous what has gone on the last several years. Look, it's just a job, whether you're president of the United States or you work at J.C. Penney and sell shoes. They're both just jobs. Get over it. Such nonsense. And you just hope that whoever has the job does the job well and is instead not some sort of clown. Because no one needs a clown. Whether you're buying shoes at J.C. Penney, you don't expect to walk in there and find some idiot who's a clown. And you don't expect that to be someone who serves in government either. Anyways, enough said there. So Jesus here just shows and demonstrates that God himself and being religious doesn't make life easier. And in fact, it would seem that he is sometimes the very source of our difficulties. Martin Luther had a word for this that isn't really translatable. Of course, he spoke German, 400 or 500 years ago, but it was Anfechtungen in German, and it doesn't really translate into English very well, but it means difficulty and trouble. And Luther was often wont to say that God is our Anfechtungen. He is the one who oftentimes brings us these difficulties, as was the case here. He walked them purposely away from the food so that they could see that he would provide for them. And in truth, that is actually the same lesson for us. No, he's not going to just simply take a lunch box, some kid's Batman lunch box, and suddenly turn it into a feast for thousands. He doesn't do that. What we do find him doing is giving us the ability to work. He finds us forming government resources where we take care of those who are less able to take care of themselves. And no, that's not socialism. That's just how a simple, reasonable government works. Think it through. A fire department doesn't just put out fires at their own homes. So if you're so stupid you think that everything is socialism, well, then you're I can't help you. You're an idiot. Fire department is a group of people who get together for a common good, and a lot of what we do is for common good. I hear people say, "Oh, it's socialism." For heaven's sakes, scrape the crud out of your ears and think. Please, just do a little bit of thinking. No, most of what we do is for common good. We have librarians, and they take care of all the books, but they serve all the people in the community. We have soldiers, and they carry guns, and they protect our borders, and they protect other countries who are weaker than ourselves, etc. They're policemen, they carry guns, and they're called upon to protect and serve, as their motto everywhere is, not just in the United States, but no matter where you go, the motto of police is to protect and serve, because that just makes sense. And so this is how society works. So God doesn't simply just wave a wand and suddenly fish and bread appear, or manna from the heavens covering the ground, like he did with the Jews in their travels. No, what God does is he asks us to work together sensibly, reasonably, with the reason and logic he gave us as human beings, to share kindness, to be compassionate. The word here for compassion in the Greek is splagizomai. Oh, there goes the dyslexia. Splagizomai is from the guts, from the lower guts. You see, for the Jews, the heart was not the seat of compassion. The heart was a seat of bad intent. Out of the heart proceeds murmurs, envies, murders. But the gut of compassion and mercy proceeds from the guts. It's like when you have a gut feeling. You see someone in need, it gives you a gut emotion. That's the word here in the text. And so, even though God himself had been there on Anfechtungen, or the one who brought or caused the difficulty of the day, even as he does now, people go, if we're having hard times or illness or whatever, this must be from the devil. No, not at all. In fact, nothing comes before God's people that God himself did not approve yesterday. The book of Job is no joke. It's basically how God still operates with us. So whether it's good or bad, hard or easy, fun or brings tears, it's from the same hand. And yet, he does have compassion. And this is why he looked at us overall and decided to bring us home, bring us to himself. This deals with issues far outside of our ability to understand. This deals with things like sin and compassion, mercy and forgiveness. And if you think you have a formula for this, or if you understand God in this matter, I would contend with you that you probably don't. Because I contend that we don't even properly know what sin is. It's not a list of rights and wrongs, for sure. In fact, it's me before a being that I don't know, a being who's always been whatever, and I'm just this mortal coil that comes and goes and is no more. And yet I stand before him for some reason, and he's for some reason interested in me. Not only interested, he demands that I walk with him and be perfect. As he said in the Old Testament, walk with me and be thou perfect. And that's not going to happen, because I'm not perfect and neither are you. See, that's the real problem. And so in the face of that problem, God looked at our situation and said, I can fix this. I alone can fix this. They can't do thing one. They can't even recognize what the real problem is because they don't know me. But who and what they are makes me furious. And so God said, I can fix this. And in compassion, out of a gut feeling, he sent his son, Jesus, to be born of Mary, to live among us, to be counted among us, to throw his lot in with ours, to call our lot his own, and then to stand before his Father and make it all right. And if you claim to understand the logistics of that, well, then either you've gone mad or you're lying, because that's far outside of our pay grade. We don't understand that. This is called the mystery of the gospel. This is to understand the mercies, the great mercies of the Almighty. And I don't pretend to understand, but I'm glad to accept this. I'm glad to have him hand this to me. And the hand of faith that this grabs hold of this and holds tight to us, this what the old theologians call fides actualis, this hand of faith that grabs this gift of God that he gives to us, he places upon us. We don't deserve it, we don't acquire it. He gives it to us through the word and his promise. So this is how God is. This is why life is the way it is. It's not a smooth road, it's rough. This is why sometimes he's the one who leads us into hard times. And yet when he does, he always has something in mind to provide for us. It's no mistake that when Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son, the place where the ram was caught and his son was spared being sacrificed was the Lord will provide. And that's who the Lord is and what he does, just like in this text. So this text really isn't about a miraculous feeding at all. It's about how God leads us through life. Difficult and fun, tears, worries, and finally death. And yet he stands over us, by us, under us the whole time. All right, well, this has been retired Pastor Karl Schmidt from Calvary Lutheran Church, a little Lutheran church in Amherst, New York, 575 Air Road, Amherst, New York. I'm retired from there. We're currently without a pastor, and we'll get there someday, maybe when COVID's over or whatever. However the Lord guides and leads, right? So, take care and do well.